Hey everyone. So we'll get started here in just a few minutes. We'll give more people an opportunity to join, but thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to go ahead and get all the links ready for today, but go ahead and let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay, and also where you're from. I love to know where everyone's from, so just let me know which state you're watching from. All right, awesome. Looks like we have a few people here. So I see we got someone from Georgia, also South Carolina and Texas. Okay, awesome. So my fellow Southerners are in the house. That's nice. So if you're just joining us, go ahead and say hello in the chat. Let me know where you're viewing from. All right, we got someone from Virginia. Awesome. And Illinois. All right. Well, it's great to see everybody virtually. Obviously, I can't quite see you literally. But thank you so much for giving up a portion of your Sunday evening to connect. Since it is June, I know some of us, depending on where you live, you might have just finished your school year or you might have been out for like a whole month already. So we're going to be talking about planning for the next school year, just kind of using this as an opportunity to exchange resources, tips, tricks, things like that. And so, yeah, it's entirely possible that some of us have like just ended school. I know I was at the AP reading a couple weeks ago, and there were teachers that were literally leaving the AP reading to go back to give the final exams for their classes. A lot of them were from like up north. And like for us, like I've been out since around Memorial Day, so our summer is like ticking away. Okay, first timer for AP and super nervous. That's totally okay. We all had to start somewhere. And honestly, this is a great group of people that come. We meet once a month, the last Sunday of every month. So for June and July, we're going to be doing more of like the planning type stuff. And then throughout the school year, we'll do like different check-ins and things like that, just to kind of, like I said, share resources. So let me go ahead and get started. So I've got like kind of like a little presentation that I put together for us. But I do want to make sure this is very like interactive. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. There's also a Q&A tab. Either place is fine. And you're also welcome to share links as well. So I know a couple people have some great resources that they use in their classroom. So if you are comfortable with it and you have something that you want to share with other people, you're welcome to put it in the chat as well. And then I usually do a follow-up email, usually a day or two after these, to those that are on my email list. So if you typically receive emails from me, expect that kind of update. And if you haven't received emails from me and you would like to, I will put that link in the chat. All it is just kind of like whenever I post a major video on my YouTube channel, or whenever there's a teacher chat or just some event coming up, I try to send out an email. So I will include a link there in case anyone wants to join that. But let's go ahead and get started. So let's see. I want to make sure I share the right tab here. I did not do virtual teaching. We were in person the entire time of COVID. So I am not the most adept at some of these things. Some of you are probably way better than I am at that. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see this okay. Let me just make it a little bit bigger on my screen. Okay. So this is an unofficial AP Lang teacher chat. It's not like endorsed by the College Board or anything. But if we haven't met yet, my name is Beth Hall. I go by Coach Hall Writes on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I'm an AP Lang teacher from Arkansas, and I've been teaching AP Lang for several years. My favorite of all the things we do in AP Lang is rhetorical analysis. So I actually had a shirt made. You can see it in that photo. It says rhetorical analysis is my jam. But if you're ever looking to connect on social media, look up Coach Hall Writes. On Instagram, I try to do Instagram stories, especially during the school year where I'm like talking about what I'm doing in class. My TikTok is more for students, quick tutorials for students. And then YouTube is both students and teachers. All right, so what we're going to be covering today is just kind of planning for next school year. Everybody is welcome, whether you're brand new or a veteran teacher. In July, we'll also focus on planning. Depending on what we talk about today, I'll have new stuff for July. So I hope to see you then as well. And like I said, feel free to respond in the chat or the Q&A tab. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that I am doing something on YouTube Live in July. It's going to be a 3-day kind of like live video series. The first day, July 6th, we're going to be talking about annotations, and I'm going to show you some different tips and tricks I have, especially for the beginning of the year. I feel like at the beginning of the year, when we just get a new group of students, sometimes there's questions of like, how do I approach this? Or what do I need to make them do? How do I make it rigorous enough? How do I meet them where they are? So we're talking about annotations, thesis statements. I'm excited for the thesis statement day because I have some templates to give you and some different things to make your life a lot easier when it comes to teaching thesis statements. And then day 3, we're going to be talking about line of reasoning. So I do have a link to that if you want to receive emails about that. If you're already on my email list, you'll get those emails anyway. But yeah, it's going to be on YouTube. I'm a little nervous about doing it on YouTube Live, but it should be pretty fun. So how's it going for everybody? Do you have any questions or worries about the upcoming school year? Let me know in the chat because I want to make sure that if anyone has any specific questions about AP Lang or like how do I address this particular issue or how do I plan for this, I want to make sure that since you're here, we get all of those questions answered. So go ahead and type any questions or worries, concerns, whatever it is that you have in the chat. And nothing is a silly question or concern. We've all been there. So if you have questions about textbooks, text recommendations, adopting a syllabus, like let us know so that we can all help. So yeah, go ahead and type those in the chat. And while people are doing that, I'm just going to kind of move along and I'll like stop sharing in a second to see what we've got. Okay, so I wanted to address a couple frequently asked questions that I've seen in the different Facebook groups and also questions that people have asked me. So one of the most common questions at this point in the year is which textbook should I use? And I'm going to be really honest. I don't really use a textbook for AP Lang. I used to. Our school has the Language of Composition 3rd edition. I assumed they would have a 4th edition by now. I don't know if it's like in the works or not, but it seemed like they were coming out with a new edition every 5 years. I still use the textbook, but I typically use part of it for my college English class, which is not my AP class. And part of the reason why is because I have found other materials that I like for AP Lang a little bit better. I like to use more of the release prompts and stuff. But if you have the Language of Composition book, there are some really great pieces in there. So I do use it a little bit for AP Lang, but I also use it for some of my other classes. Our school has gone primarily digital, so we're using textbooks a whole lot less. I also highly recommend the AMSCO textbook. If you know Tim from the Garden of English, he's one of the co-authors of that one. If I had to adopt a new textbook, like if that was an option for me, I would probably choose the AMSCO one because it's more in line with the exam as it is now. But I think there's pros and cons to both. And I think it's definitely valuable to supplement with other resources as well. Especially for rhetorical analysis, there's a lot of different speeches out there that I like to bring in that are not necessarily in the textbooks. So I would love to know if you use a textbook and you feel really strongly about it, either like you love it or you hate it, let me know in the chat, because I feel like most people are either language of composition or AMSCO, but I know some people like Thank You for Arguing, and there's a few others. So if there's one that you think other people should know about or should check out, let us know in the chat, because those are the two that are most common. And so if you're looking for a new textbook, honestly, my recommendation would probably be the AMSCO. But I know there's some I don't want to say loopholes, but there's some stipulations about you have to order a certain amount to get certain teacher information and things like that. So I know that's a point of confusion, and I don't know all the details about that. But I know that's a common question. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second just to check the chat and see how everything's going. Will you be recording the YouTube live? Yes, Laura, I will be. So the ones in July, those 3 days that I was talking about, those are definitely going to be recorded. They should be available on my channel. Usually it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, depending on how YouTube is processing. So it'll record it and it'll post it. So that way, if you miss it live, because I had to choose a time where my kiddos will be in bed. So 9 p.m. it was. But yes, they'll be there. So you can watch it the next day or a couple days later. Let's see. So Tracy, I noticed you said you're having trouble hearing. Are you able to hear now? I don't have any tips for sound other than just checking your settings. Okay. So yeah, someone said, if you're accessing on mobile, sometimes it's difficult. Thank you for pointing that out, because I did not know that was oh, it looks like Tracy got it. Okay. Sorry, I'm catching up on the chat, y'all. Let's see. Full-length novels, if so, how many? Okay, we're definitely going to get to that, because it's another really common question, and I know there's different theories about that. I feel like I spend too much time teaching to the test for an entire first semester, and students are burned out by the time we get to the themed units. I'm not sure how to plan for this class. Okay, I want to talk about that as well, because I think there needs to be a balance. I will admit I teach to the test, but at the same time, I also have themed units. So I think there's a way to balance it out. And obviously, it's kind of hard, because some people I know are very against teaching to the test, and other people are yes, you should. I kind of look at it this way. If students do well on the exam and they're able to get the college credit, then that is a win for them. But obviously, not all students are going to make a qualifying score, but I firmly believe that they are better off having taken the class. And so we kind of have to find that balance. For some students, it takes more than a year. One of my former students is now playing softball at the University of Arkansas, and there's rumors that she might actually make the future Olympic team. She is killing it, and I'm so proud of her. She was probably my most studious AP Lang student, but her score was not exactly what we were hoping for. However, when she went off to college and was trying to balance college sports and essay writing for all her classes, she's it was like AP Lang. I knew how to do it all, and she's thriving now. So I really think there is this balance of teaching to the test, because obviously we want to make sure they're prepared, but also kind of balancing it out so that they don't burn out and we don't burn out, because teacher burnout is also a problem. I don't know about anybody else, but there's points in the year where I'm just I am so tired. All right, let's see. So recommendations for using Thank You for Arguing. Yes. Does anyone in here use that? I have looked at it, but I'm not in a position to buy more books for our district, so I haven't actually used it. What are your favorite pieces from the language of composition? Yes, we'll definitely talk about that too. There's a few that I really like, and there's certain chapters I like better than others. I spent a lot of time teaching Space Cat. When do you assign your first rhetorical analysis essay? Okay, so yes, we can definitely talk about that too, because I feel like especially pacing at the beginning of the year is really tricky. Balancing American literature, yes. Okay, here, let me answer, because I have a couple slides about some of the questions that people have asked. And then if I don't have a slide for it, then I will go back through the chat and answer. Instead of me just saying, oh yeah, we'll get to that. So Let's see. So let me talk about language of composition for a second. There's a few pieces in there that my students have liked. Some of those speeches in there they've liked. I think the chapters that we use the most, there's a chapter on education. I think it's chapter 5. I could be wrong though. I like a lot of the stuff in there. I don't use all of it, but some of it is very usable. And then because the College Board has done a lot of education-based exam prompts recently, especially for like synthesis, I'm able to supplement with that. And there's some presidential speeches in there. There's one by Emmeline Pankhurst, which they actually used for, if anyone's seen the course exam description, there's like 2 example passages. One's about NASA. That's like the writing questions. And the reading questions are a passage about women's rights. They don't say it's Emmeline Pankhurst, but it's her speech. And so I like that one because I can use the language of composition book, and then I can give them those questions from the College Board that are in the course exam description. They're like buried in there. They're like on page like 122 or something of that PDF. So I like those. There's a few more. I have a little like handout for later, not handout, that has some of my recommendations. But my students have liked the chapter on justice, education. For college English this year, I added in the chapter on gender, and we chose like selected pieces from that, and my students liked it. I was a little nervous about some of them, but overall, like they did really well, and they liked the content. And so like I like the conversations part at the end of those chapters where they kind of make their own synthesis. I thought like that's one of the highlights for me of that particular book. So yeah, but there's also some in there that like my kids just don't really connect with, or they're just not really a good fit. So I kind of pick and choose. I don't do an entire chapter, but I kind of choose from within certain chapters of that book. So someone asked, I saw this in the chat, something about like basically like what do you start with? Now I want to be very clear here that my methodology does not work for everybody, but I like to start with rhetorical analysis. And there's a couple reasons why. First of all, I find that rhetorical analysis takes the longest for my students to master, if you will. We do have a little bit of rhetorical analysis when they're 10th graders. But for the most part, they are stronger at argument and synthesis than rhetorical analysis. Even though they've done like literary analysis in other classes, there's something about the rhetorical analysis and like the way they're expected to write that takes my students a bit longer. Also, the skills for rhetorical analysis relate to the ACT and the SAT, the reading section, and the AP Lang reading multiple choice. So I like to start with that because I really like them to start to understand the rhetorical situation and basically like identifying an author's claims and line of reasoning. So we start with rhetorical analysis, and I honestly spend like 9 to 12 weeks on it. I have multiple units in that time period, but it's at least a marking period. I have tried, it was a few years ago, I tried to do like every like 3 to 4 weeks we switched units, kind of like how what's it called, the course, like the College Board units. I tried to follow that a little bit more closely, and it was too quick for my students. It worked better when we stayed on certain topics longer and had more practice. So I'm not knocking it. I think it works for some people, but I kind of liked staying on one topic just a little bit longer. So then after that, we move on to synthesis and argument. I do synthesis first because my students do better when they have the sources. They find argument to be the hardest. So with synthesis, because it's basically an argument essay with sources, they tend to do better if we start with that first. So we're able to kind of explore the idea of, how do we construct an argument before they actually have to do it on their own. And so I also will combine synthesis and research sometimes. And then we go back to rhetorical analysis before the exam. And then like the last 2 or 3 weeks before the exam is kind of like a student choice thing where I let them kind of tell me what they want. I know several teachers who start with argument and synthesis, and they do so very successfully. So I don't think there's a right or wrong approach to this. I think it's kind of like what you as a teacher want to do. But I personally like to start with rhetorical analysis. So let me just like check the chat real quick and see what people are. So in a year-long class, how long do you teach it? We spend about 9 to 12 weeks on it. And then I have a unit on education where that's kind of our pivot point, because they do some rhetorical analysis of certain things. And then we shift to synthesis that are like prompts based on education. So I have like one unit where like that's my pivot point for them. And then in the spring, when we go back to it, it kind of depends on the timing, but we maybe spend like anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks on it. It just kind of depends. Last year, I think we spent closer to 6 weeks, just because they asked for it. Like they were like, we need to make sure we understand this. So, all right, let's see what else we got. So Tracy said that she started with RA and then argument and then synthesis, thinking about switching to RA, synthesis, then argument. Yeah, that's how I do it. Just like I said, because my students do better when they're provided with the sources. So, and it's also, I feel like it's easier for me to teach them how to write these types of essays with synthesis. And then I kind of consider synthesis like the training wheels, and then argument is like taking the training wheels off the bike. That's kind of how it feels with my students. But does anybody do it the opposite way? Does anyone start with argument? Because I know some people do, and I think that could be a very good approach as well. Because I know some people start with like claims and like having students make the argument, and then they go, usually I think it's like argument, synthesis, rhetorical analysis. So if anyone starts that way and it works for you, let me know. Okay, Jennifer said I did argument before synthesis this year because argument is harder. Yeah, so I think it just kind of depends. And also we all have different students and they have different strengths. I find argument is the hardest for me to teach because the students do better. A lot of my students are in APUSH, AP US History. And so when we introduce argument it's usually the very beginning of the second semester, they have already had synthesis, and then they've already had half a year of APUSH. So for some of the prompts, they're able to bring in much better outside knowledge. Whereas if I were to do it earlier in the year, I would get a lot of very trivial examples, I think. And I say this because my sophomores had to do for their state testing. They call it an analytical expository essay, but it's kind of like a watered down argument. And we were preparing for the state test, and I was asking them to come up with examples. And I gave them the same acronym for evidence that I give my juniors, and all of their examples were from like pop culture and the movies. And I was like, what about history? Like any historical examples? And they were like, well, like they couldn't think of any. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with pop culture examples as long as they could explain it. But for me, there was that noticeable maturity. If I was comparing my sophomores to my juniors, by mid-year, my juniors have a lot more worldly knowledge. And also I guess through the rhetorical analysis, I try to build up their world knowledge as much as I can. So they just are able to come up with better evidence at the mid-year point. But I do think people can start it in the fall. Okay, Tyler said, I plan to do argument last, but because I was new and slow and it was a weird year anyway, I really ended up shortchanging it in the end. I plan to open with the basics of it and then come back to it after rhetorical analysis. That's totally fine. I think there is like an overlap though, right? So, and it also depends on what you're giving them for rhetorical analysis. Because if you're giving them pieces that have a strong argument, you could connect it back to those basics that you reviewed as well. And I think that's important too. Rhetorical analysis could potentially serve as a model for argument, as far as like, oh, hey, like, you know how they made rhetorical choices and they structured their argument this way. When you write your own argument, you could do that. Because I know that's kind of like an epiphany that my students have later on in the year when they're writing argument, is they're like, oh, like we can make rhetorical choices too. And it's like, yeah, you can, sometimes more successfully than others. Someone said, I have a current events Friday. Yes, I love that. I love like current events and anything we can do to help them bring in that outside knowledge. I'm actually working on something. So some of you might have seen this post in the Facebook group if you were on the Facebook group. Like back before the test, is I had them do what I called a Q3 database. So during the year, I had them do like this ongoing assignment where it's kind of like current events, kind of like just supplemental stuff to what they were reading. And then they had to like narrow it down to like certain topics that they felt like they were experts in. And my students, the feedback I got from the assignment was, after we could actually talk to them about the exam, they were like, yes, that was helpful. They said we didn't all use stuff from that assignment, but it gave us confidence going in. So this year I kind of modified it because I asked my students for feedback and they were like, well, could you like make it like, they wanted it to be like Google Slides and not a Google Doc, and different things like that for the assignment. And they were also like, did you share that with your AP like teacher friends? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay, well, maybe like make it a little fancier before you share it with them. So I have something that I'm working on to share with y'all. It's just not ready yet, but they suggested I add more color instead of just keeping everything a black and white Google Doc. So when it's ready, I will share it with y'all, and y'all can tell me if you like the color better. But they were like, yeah, it's a little plain. Good assignment, but it's plain. So we'll see. Let's see. I have my students do rhetorical précis. Yes. So if anyone's unfamiliar with rhetorical précis, it's kind of like this template, if you will, kind of like, and a lot of students can use it as like an introductory paragraph. I have like a template kind of sentence frame that I give them for a thesis statement, but I think a rhetorical précis works very similarly. So it's a way to kind of summarize the text in some sense, and also they can use it in their writing. So if you're looking for a way to kind of scaffold the student writing, the rhetorical précis is a great option. And once they get comfortable with it, they can kind of like veer away from that if they want to. But yeah, I definitely think if you've never heard of it, you might want to like look into it. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I was always told it was précis, but I don't know if that's the right pronunciation. How long do you spend on argument? I honestly, out of all three FRQs, I spend the least amount of time on argument, mostly because I spend longer on synthesis. There are certain prompts that I really like. And so, and I also tend to do argument. It always falls around our like state testing, and that time always gets interrupted. Let's see. Oh, and then yes, somebody mentioned like the ReHugo. There's different acronyms that people use. ReHugo is one of them, and there's like a project that people could do. So let's see. I did ReHugo first semester last year, and it wasn't amazing. I moved it to second semester with pre-AP 10, which is much better. I want to do a semester-long current events type project in AP. They need to know more about the world. Any suggestions or starting places? So one of the things that I did last year, and I don't know, I think the students said it was helpful, was so we tried to connect it to whatever we were covering in class. Like just here's like an outside article that you can read and things like that. Podcasts are great. TED Talks are great. They liked those. And then like, I started trying to have them do current events, but I had to be really careful about like which current events they chose. And I don't know if anyone else is in a similar situation, but there are certain topics that like I am not totally comfortable breaching in my class just because of the climate and culture at my school. So with current events, I have to be very careful with what I assign. But I would say definitely a project like that can be very helpful. What I intend to do this year is to kind of give them different choices of different things they could do, and kind of have like some kind of like weekly check-in where they kind of complete the info on a slide, and I can just kind of give them a completion grade. And I want it to culminate into something, but I haven't totally figured out what yet. So if anyone has any suggestions about how you do current events, or if you do any kind of like the ReHugo project, I think is what some people call it, or if you do anything where you're trying to get them like connected to the real world in any way, if you have any suggestions of things that have worked, please let us know in the chat. Oh, someone said the donut. Yes, the donut is really good. I've also heard a couple people use all sides. I tried that with my college English class, and it worked okay for the assignment that I needed them to do it for. But the donut is also really good. And I'm pretty sure the donut's free. So ReHugo, someone's going to have to remind me what it all stands for because I use the acronym CHORES, but ReHugo is an acronym for like different categories of evidence, I believe. Yes, someone's typing it in the chat. Thank you. All the acronyms I feel like mean the same thing. So choose one acronym that you like and go for it. I do CHORES. Some people do ReHugo. Yes, the donut. Thank you, Gina, for posting the link. The donut is kind of like this news website. They're impartial, and they present it in a way that kids like to read. Someone gave a great explanation. It's a newsletter that is curated with news every day. It has both sides. So I think that can be really helpful, especially if you are trying to navigate potential sensitivities, or if you're trying to make sure that you're presenting things in an even way, however you want to say it. It can be really helpful. And I think there's different ways to kind of have students like potentially like choose their topics and stuff too. Like I know if anyone follows Amanda Cardenas, she goes by Mud and Ink Teaching on Instagram. She's in her Instagram stories talked a lot about the donut and different ways that you could kind of like have students use it, either incorporating it into lessons where everyone does it, or kind of using it as like a choice board type thing. So I don't think she's talked about it super recently because it's the summer, but I know she is super big on using the donut. So yes, I'm going to have to look into it a little bit more. All right. So let me see. So I think if I did not answer your question, then like feel free to like write it again. I will not be offended. But I wanted to talk a little bit about text recommendations. Let me just show you, and I'll put the link for this in the chat in case people are curious. Okay. So I had made this like a year ago when someone asked me about text recommendations. This is not an inclusive list, and I do not teach all of this in AP Lang. These are just ones that my students have liked over the years. And I remember I teach 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So these are ones that I've done and different units for those different grades. So I have Satire. We moved this. We did it in AP Lang, and this is the last year that we're doing it in AP Lang. So we moved it down to 10th grade. And the reason why is because as best we can tell, they're not going to do Satire on the AP Lang exam anymore. My students really liked the unit. They liked Satire, but it felt like I was spending about maybe 4 weeks on Satire, and I was like, I could probably use this time better. So I moved it down to like second semester for my 10th graders. They liked it, and I think they did okay with it. There was one parent who was upset about a modest proposal though. And I've taught it for years and we'd never had a problem. And then I jinxed myself because I told the students I've never had an issue with anyone in the modest proposal. And then the next day somebody was upset. So don't jinx yourself like I did. Luckily it all blew over and my principal was like super supportive. But what I usually have them do is we look at like the Magna-Sols prompt, and a couple other appropriate ones from the Onion, because not everything from the Onion is appropriate. And they read A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. And then this one, Let Them Eat Dog, is in the language of composition. I think A Modest Proposal is too. I think it might be the finance or economy chapter. But I like pairing those together. And then I had them do an assignment where they could write their own modest proposal. I just had to be very specific about what they could and could not write about. But if you're looking for Satire recommendations, those are a couple. There's some letters here. A lot of these are old exam prompts. I Am Very Real. My students have always kind of liked this one. It's Vonnegut, and he's writing to a school board who was like burning his books. And there is a Common Lit one on that. So if you use Common Lit, they have some questions. I haven't done the Groucho Marx letter to Warner Brothers in a few years, but when I did do it, my students really liked it. Education, I have some recommendations here as well. And I'll put the link in the chat if people want to actually like access this. Environment and nature. So I try to group things thematically, but you can see like For education, some of this is rhetorical analysis and some of it's synthesis. So this is some of the stuff I use in my AP class. I do this around October. So that this unit is this isn't the exact unit, but this is a transition. That's how I transition from rhetorical analysis to synthesis, is like we look at different issues in education. So I have a few on here. There's a couple. I really like Let There Be Dark. They actually had this on the SAT before they took the essay off. So you can still find it if you type in like Let There Be Dark, like SAT essay, or something like that. That's how I used to search for it. They had that there. And I like the Louvre prompt from the exam, Locavore, Wind Farms. And there's one that's I've used a couple times on AP Classroom. I think it's called like Lab Girl. And that one's a rhetorical analysis prompt that I like. This one, the giant water bug, I've seen it called different things. Oops, I should probably have that be capitalized. I think this one's kind of an easy one. So we used to use this to kind of introduce rhetorical analysis. It used to sort of be at the beginning of this like nature unit. And students liked it, but I just kind of took it. We made the decision to take it out of 10th grade, and I think they're putting it in our 9th grade unit because it was just a little too easy for 10th grade. So yeah, and then several texts about identity. There's a lot of great ones on here. I'm probably missing some really popular ones. Then a lot of these are some of the speeches that I like. And then I have a section for sports just because there was a time where I did a whole unit on sports. And then there's some others here. Anyway, I'll stop rambling. But let me know in the chat what your students' favorite texts are. It could be full length work because some people had some questions about that, or it could be something like a favorite exam prompt. And I will put that link for you in the chat in case anyone wants that link. But let me know what your students enjoy, because I'm always looking for stuff for some of my classes to just kind of freshen it up a little bit or add new things. And for those of you that are brand new AP Lang teachers, it might be helpful to kind of see like what other people are doing. Someone said they use the acronym GOPHERS. Yes, I haven't seen that in a while, but yes. And Tracy said, I love Let There Be Dark. I'm glad that someone else knew what that was. And giant water bug is awesome. Yeah, my students like don't ever actually believe me that there is a bug. Basically, if you haven't read it, like there's this bug that like basically like sucks out the guts of like frogs. And so she's talking about this frog looking like a deflated football and stuff. And so I can always tell because they'll Google it and then someone will be like, wow. And like, I'm like, did you not believe it? And they're like, no. So they look up this water bug. So what you showed us was for 10th grade. No, sorry. I should clarify. Not all of it. It's just that one piece, the giant water bug. We moved that to 10th grade. Or no, sorry, it was in 10th grade, and I think we're moving it to 9th grade. Partially because my teacher bestie is moving from 11th grade to 9th grade this year. And so she was like, she has to do all new curriculum. And she's like, can I please have this one? I know this text. I can teach this text. And I was like, yes, you can have that. We shuffled it down. Anyway. And then the satire stuff, we moved it to our sophomores at the very end of the year. Because we didn't want to do it in AP Lang anymore because it's not tested. And so, yeah, but most of those things are things that I have taught to my juniors. I have AP and then I have an honors juniors class. So yeah, but that's not like my actual syllabus. Those are just texts that I have taught at the honors and AP level that I've liked. So hopefully this link works. I will put that in the chat in case anyone wants to go see those texts again. And if anyone has recommendations, I have a few in here that I haven't heard of before. Yes, somebody asked what chores means. That's an acronym for argument. And thank you to Kate for writing it out. So current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, entertainment, and then either science or sports. Yes. My students love the Claire Booth loose prompt. Yes, I taught that one a couple years ago, and then I used it this year as a review for the exam because so it says like this is an introduction to her speech, and that year it seemed like a lot of students maybe didn't catch on that it wasn't her whole speech. It was like the beginning of her speech, and she's preparing them for later on. So I used that one like a week or two before the exam to really remind my students to read the prompt closely, because sometimes they miss the nuance of the College Board wording. There's also one in AP Classroom by Claire Booth Luce, and it's I think they call it Women in Wartime. And I use that one. We have study sessions every year that our school makes us do. They're actually pretty useful. And I used it this year at one of our study sessions as a cold read, meaning like my students had to write about it without having seen it before, kind of like they do on the exam. And they liked that. Yes, Albright commencement speech is really good. And that one's very approachable too. So if you are looking for approachable text, the Albright prompt is really approachable. And so I think so is Florence Kelly. Someone said that they use Banneker's letter. I love Banneker's letter as well. This year I did like the speeches that I did that one toward the beginning because I did it in chronological order. And so I ended with Albright and like maybe one other one that was more current. And the feedback I got from some of my students who were struggling at the time was do it in reverse chronological order, because they said that like Albright and some of the other ones were more approachable. So they said, and I'm going to try it this year because I'm always interested in like student feedback too. So in my mind, I wanted to go in chronological order, but they said my students said do it in reverse chronological order and see how it goes, because they found like Banneker and a couple other ones that were from like that time period. They found it a little bit challenging. And they said once they got the hang of rhetorical analysis, it was easier. So I will let you guys know how that goes. Let's see. The Obama Rosa Parks one is very accessible. I agree. I intend to add that one into lessons as well. And then this year's prompt, the one about like identity, the Latina judge's voice, I think can be pretty approachable in its own right. So if you do a unit on identity, that one could be a good one to add. I know that we do a unit on identity, so I'm going to add that one in there. But I can't necessarily do it this year, because what our school does is we have a state mock exam, and what we do is we use the previous year's exam prompts as the exam. So so basically my upcoming students, when they do their mock exam, it'll be the 2022 exam. So I can't use that one in class like this year. Moving forward, I can. But yeah, we have like a state mock reading every year. So I don't know if any of you are from Arkansas, but if you are and you participate in that, it's actually kind of fun. Let's see. Looking for some other recommendations. There's a couple in here that I haven't heard of, so I want to check out. But yeah, definitely check out some of these recommendations if you're trying to put together a list as well. Yeah, let's see. Will you talk about unit themes? Yes. Okay, so let me like I don't know if the slide's helpful, but let me show you a slide I have on like how I prepare my units, because someone asked me that recently and I thought it was a really interesting question because I had never really explained my process to anybody before. And before I do that, let me just address this because someone did ask it. Do you do full-length text? I personally do not teach a full-length text in my AP Lang class. I do teach a full-length text in my Honors 11 class. So basically the difference at our school is if they want to take the AP exam, they go into AP Lang. If they don't want to take the exam, they go into Honors 11. And so anyway, I don't do a full-length text as a class. I'm considering doing independent reading on a quarterly basis for my students to help them build some of that world knowledge. But I know some teachers use some of these texts very successfully in AP Lang. So Educated is really popular, Just Mercy, Outliers, but also anything by Gladwell is usually pretty good for AP Lang. And then The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is one that we do in Honors 11. Outliers, I will say, I think has a lot of potential for AP Lang. It's full of a lot of really interesting anecdotes. That's kind of his writing style, and I think it could be very useful. We taught it a couple years ago in not AP Lang, but a different class, and students had kind of mixed reactions to it. I found it super interesting, but some of the students felt like it was kind of slow moving. I don't think they connected with his style, but he's also written Blink, which I think could have been really helpful for this year's prompt about like timely decisions. He has one, David and Goliath. I'm missing them, but he's got like 4 or 5 that I know are pretty common. And your state or school might require fiction. So I know some teachers use The Great Gatsby, the Crucible, things like that. So I would say if you have a passion for teaching longer texts and you want to incorporate 1 or maybe 2, it's probably completely fine. But I think there are several teachers who don't. So I personally don't, but that's just kind of my style. So as far as how I plan, someone wanted to know like kind of how you choose your unit themes. So I like make a list of the texts that I want to teach. I kind of do like a brain dump and I group stuff together by topic or theme. And I try to create units and then fill in the gaps. So like, for instance, when I was planning units a couple years ago, I knew I wanted to cover identity. So I wrote down all the texts that I was kind of interested in for that. And then kind of tried to figure out, okay, what's the best order to teach them and things like that. Same for education. So I've done a unit on identity. I've done a unit on education. I've also just done a unit on speeches. And I know that sounds kind of odd, but it was kind of like just like famous historical speeches. And that's the unit where I started and did them all in chronological order. And this year I'm flipping it to see if it works better because I liked the text in there. It's just that my students really struggled with some of the ones that were from like the 1800s, some of the language in that. And so I guess like the choices might have been less obvious. So I'm going to try to start it with the more contemporary ones that are maybe more approachable and then build to the harder ones. If anyone has tried that and it worked for you, let me know because I'm basically taking my unit and like inverting it. But some of the things that I like to consider are the approachability of the text. I try to work with a lot of pieces that are exam length, so approximately like 600 to 800 words. Some of the stuff we read is longer. I try to find stuff, especially at the beginning of the year, that has relatively obvious rhetorical choices because a lot of my students don't have a strong understanding of that when they come into the class. And so I think that kind of ties in with the approachability, but approachability can mean like the reading ease of it and the topic as well, I think. But I try to find ones that have perhaps more obvious rhetorical choices and then ones that might be a bit more obscure. Because that's always like one of the questions that I get on my YouTube channel from students is like, what do you do if you don't see any rhetorical choices in the passage? And so I try to make sure that students have a strong understanding of like a rhetorical choice is just what they're doing. So we don't always have to have fancy names for it. We can use strong verbs and that's totally okay. I also try to consider student interest and also like diversity as well. I want to make sure I'm representing multiple voices and perspectives in my classroom. Though I teach most of my students for either 2 or 3 years, so I also kind of look at it from a longer perspective too. Like I look at where my class fits into their entire high school experience because you can't cram everything into 1 year. For student interest, a couple years ago, I had a ton of athletes in my class. So that's when we did a lot more of like this sports stuff. Like we did a sports unit. This past year, there were a lot fewer athletes in the class, and I just kind of got the vibe they would not connect with that. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is kind of like what pieces might be of high interest. And obviously that changes. So yeah. So I would say, does anyone have any like, besides identity or we have a unit on like man versus nature, I'm trying to think what else, education. What are some other topics that people cover? That because someone was asking about like unit themes. Let's see. So as people might be answering, I'll like look at. Is AP or the College Board moving away from historical texts? That's a great question, Stacy, and I don't have an exact answer, but let me tell you my theory. I think the College Board is choosing more speeches lately. That's not to say that they're always going to choose speeches, but the College Board technically has to either get permission for the text or it has to be in the public domain. So, if that's why I think we're seeing a lot of stuff from politicians, is because if a politician gives a speech, it's public domain, so they have more access to it. I also think the College Board's trying to incorporate more voices, and so more from a contemporary perspective, we have more opportunity for different voices to be heard as opposed to like historical speeches. Also, I think that the leaning toward the speeches part is because of the rhetorical situation. Like speeches and letters tend to be a little bit easier for students to analyze, given that they're doing it in 40 minutes. But what I've been told by multiple people, sources that I trust, is that they make the exam multiple years in advance, and there's like a committee or a group that does this. And so what they do is they write multiple prompts. And so approximately every 5 years, it's written by different people or like a different cohort. And so I asked someone who works for the state of Arkansas. It's called AIMS. It's like this AP group that we have. I asked her when the next set of 5 years was. And she said, well, go by 2008 because that's when the synthesis was adopted. So 2008 to 2013, 2013 to 2018, 2018 to 2023. I don't know how COVID affected it though, because that year they had something like 28 prompts. So it's possible in theory that next year is the last one of this group of them. And then for the 2024 exam, we might see like a new shift. But yes, recently there's been a shift towards the more contemporary, which my students appreciate. But there are kind of trends within AP Lang. So I can't say that they're totally moving away from historical texts because, I don't know. But like, if you look at what they've done in the past, 10 years, Abigail Adams was older. I think Florence Kelly was 2011. That one was 1905. That wasn't super old, but yeah, they're definitely pulling from more contemporary stuff now. So I'm trying to mimic that a little bit in what I teach, but at the same time, I'm always worried for what if this is the year that they don't? So I'm trying to make sure that I expose my students to some older texts too. Luckily for me, they read a lot of older texts in APUSH for different reasons. So yes, so I can't say for certain. I can say that they apparently are not going to do satire anymore, at least not for a written essay. The other thing is that we also have to consider multiple choice, because before they redesigned the exam, we were kind of guaranteed certain time periods that they were going to do. And now they get 2 reading passages, and we don't usually get access to that, but, they might have one that's a bit older and one that's not, or something like that. So I think it's important to balance that in. But yes, there definitely seems to be a trend more recently about contemporary texts. Let's see. Someone said, my district bought David and Goliath for us. I need to figure out how I'm going to incorporate that this year. Yeah, we got some copies of it. I was going to give it to my students as an option for independent reading. I like that someone gave you a really good answer though. Like, how does he build his argument? And then they took a position on one of his claims. Yeah, I think Gladwell can be really helpful for Q3 in general. If you have any of his works. Let's see. I'm curious about teaching the isms. Our honors 3 is built on American literacy movements. And there's concern that the AP course should model this as well. Is this necessary? My personal opinion is no, you don't need to follow those literary movements. It doesn't say so in the course exam description. I can see how yes, at a school or a district level, they might want to, but our school, I'm kind of lucky. Our school gives us a little bit of autonomy. AP doesn't have to follow the same requirements as our on-level class or even our honors class. So I'm not just my personal opinion. I don't think you should have to follow those literary movements unless you want to. Someone said I've done a speech of the week for a quarter, and some speeches are political and some are from movies. Yeah, I like the idea of incorporating movies too. There's some really great sports speeches and other ones as well. when I would do the Queen Elizabeth speech to the troops at Tilbury, I would show the movie clip for that and stuff. I'm curious though, which movie speeches do you do? Because I think some other people might benefit from some ideas there, especially if we're trying to make it like fun. So Brenda, if you don't mind sharing like what movie speeches, that'd be great. You might have already done so in the chat. Okay, so someone said they do a unit on gender, music, and pop culture. A unit on dissenters. Oh, that sounds really interesting. So yeah, if you're looking for themes, we got some like some in here. Social justice. Let's see, Harvard professor. Oh, okay. I need to look up his YouTube videos. They really struggle with historical texts, but current speeches have been more accessible, so I'm concerned. Yes. I have found that with the historical texts, I have to clue them in on a lot more history than I thought I would. One thing that my APUSH teacher at our school and I have talked about is trying to align like when she's teaching that time period, I would also teach the speech, but we kind of looked at it and it doesn't really work for what I do. So my hope is that by kind of starting with the more contemporary stuff that we can go back. Like if I do it in reverse chronological order, it might help them. It might somehow, if they have more rhetorical analysis experience, then it might make the historical aspect a little bit easier. But yeah, I've found that I've had to fill in a lot more than I thought I would with some of the historical background to things. Let's see. Someone said that they're in a very conservative Southern district. I can relate. Be sure that the controversial material section from the CED was on your syllabus. Yes. So there is like, that's a good advice. There is a section there about that. Because I know there's been talk of if certain topics get like censored in certain ways, then the College Board reserves the right to revoke the class for that school district, and lots of stuff going on with that potentially for certain places. Balanced that she said she balanced her text. I agree. I've done that in a few different ways too. Like I look at, you know, what perspective are these people coming from? So if I use George Bush's 9/11 speech and he was a Republican, I make sure that I usually use something from like, let's say Kennedy, he's a Democrat. And that way, if anybody complains, which I haven't had complaints about that yet, but I have talked to my principal and I'm like, look, I'm trying to balance different time periods, different perspectives. And my principal is super supportive of it. So there isn't really an issue, but if you're running into that type of issue where people are, you know, wanting more balance, I can sympathize with that. Emphasize the purpose of the course. Yes, I agree. I think it's important from the very beginning to help students understand why they are taking the class, and like going beyond just like, oh, there's a test at the end of it and you could get college credit potentially. I think students really need to understand the value that the class itself has. Like we're teaching them how to argue, we're teaching them how to do research and to synthesize. So there's so many valuable skills that they'll learn. Oh, a cancel culture unit. I am curious about that. I think that could be super interesting. Okay. Thank you, Brenda, for putting your holiday speech doc in there. Let's see. Someone said that, oh, okay. So we might need access there if you're able to change the settings. Let's see. Okay, so in the interest of time, we've got about 5 minutes left. Let me just make sure, because I have appreciated this discussion we have so far, but I want to make sure I've answered everybody's questions. All right, so I gave you the link to some of the texts that I have used with success. Let me just show you a couple tips I have for the beginning of the year, because I think starting over, sometimes it, like each new year sometimes gets a little bit tricky. So one of the things that I've had to remind myself of each year is to focus on the basics. And I think this was kind of apparent in some of the teachers that I talked to at the reading and kind of like, you know, what their experience was. We really want to make sure that students can identify claims and make claims. Every year I have to go over how to embed evidence correctly, not just for rhetorical analysis, but for synthesis. And understanding the rhetorical situation, I feel like sometimes spend more time emphasizing that than I might need to. But when students are able to connect those rhetorical choices to the rhetorical situation, it really helps. I think if our students view Space Cat or Soapstone, whatever acronym you use, if they just view it as like a checklist, like something they have to do, and they don't really understand the purpose behind it, then they don't really get the meaning of like how we're supposed to really pull that out in these essays. So I'm really going to be focusing even more on the rhetorical situation at the beginning of the year, and getting them to make those connections, hopefully. One recommendation that I have, and if you get emails from me, and you got an email from me earlier this week, I said, my number one tip for AP teachers is short writing assignments. I think I mentioned this in this week's video too. I interviewed different readers at the reading after hours, and they gave me their best tips. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I would love it if you would check it out. But my best tip, I think, is short writing assignments, because when I first started teaching, I thought that I needed to have them write tons and tons of essays. And I know that was a question that someone asked, is like, when do they actually start writing full essays? I start with shorter writing assignments first. And here's why. When I was just beginning my teaching career, I was writing the same comments from one paragraph to the next on a student's paper, and then one paper to the next. And I was wasting a lot of my time and energy, and my poor students were getting all these corrections. And I realized I could correct that at the paragraph level. So if they can write a good thesis statement and they can write good body paragraphs, it's a lot easier for them to put it together in an essay. Whereas if we start with an essay really soon, they might not be ready for that. And so I focus on teaching them how to write a strong thesis statement. Sometimes we do it for bell work. Like we might read a piece and talk about it on, let's say, a Monday. Tuesday, they might come in and they might have their bell work to be write a thesis statement. Sometimes I'll have them do like an actual introduction. Body paragraphs. At first, students find it kind of odd to just write one paragraph, but I really focus on, having a strong topic sentence and evidence and commentary and layered, and a concluding sentence. And once they've mastered that, which doesn't really take too long, but after they've done a couple paragraphs and gotten feedback from me, then we might do an essay. And usually my first essay with them is done over multiple class periods. So I'll kind of do like a mini teach on intros, a mini teach on the body paragraphs and line of reasoning, just to make sure they're ready. So we build to a timed write. So I kind of view it as like that training wheels process. It's kind of a multi-step training wheels process, but we focus on these shorter writing assignments, and then they write an essay over multiple days. It's a longer, like, not that the essay itself is longer, but they have more time to do it. And then we build to a timed essay. So I'll have them do a timed essay about something they've read in class and talked about. And then we don't do our first cold read until probably October, maybe November. Kind of depends. So anyway, those are just some suggestions. Don't feel like you have to have your students writing essays straight out of the gate. Outlines are super helpful, and they're usually a lot faster for us as teachers to grade. But if I don't want my students to write a whole essay, I might just have them outline their essay. Like, you're not writing it, just do the outline. Or I might have them do the outline and then the essay, depending on what I feel they need. And one-pagers, I know that's not usually a writing assignment, but I think there's different ways to do it that can be helpful. But yeah, don't burn out with you or them with writing too many essays too soon. My students do a lot of writing throughout the year. I'm not going to lie to you, but we build up to it. But my students this year said, like, thank you for assigning all those essays throughout the year, because it really did help them get used to the exam pace and like that kind of stress. So I do think we need to simulate that for them. I just don't think it has to happen right away. Some popular assignments, if you're looking for ideas, analyzing commercials can be a great way to introduce rhetorical analysis. It's not my idea, but there is a food truck assignment on one of the Facebook groups. If you just type in the search in the group for food truck, you'll see pictures and stuff. I forgot which teacher posted that, so I couldn't attribute it to anybody. I'm sorry. There's an assignment that some have done about making your own rubric, which I thought was kind of clever. For synthesis, the high school drama synthesis that Katie Storms and Tim Friedis put together. Speed debating can be really interesting. And then, yeah, I don't know if Tyler is still in here. Tyler, hopefully it's the same Tyler. Tyler had emailed me something, I think, at one point, and then I saw a post in the group about it where it was a sheet of the different links to the different essays, so you could keep track of which essays you've assigned. Tyler, if you're in here and you don't mind resharing that, not to put you on the spot, but if you have that and you don't mind sharing it with people in here, that would be great. Yeah, someone said food truck is great. The one I know is by Betsy Potash. Okay, great. Awesome. So yeah, I think the food truck idea was really cool. I admittedly didn't do it with my students. By the time I found out about it, we were kind of already past that point. But yes, the food truck idea is really cool. And the rubric one, I'm probably going to explain this poorly, but like they use the actual rubric, but they like kind of make a theme. I saw some that were so clever. There's some really great examples on the Facebook group. Oh, someone said, loved your Florence Kelly video. Yes, I want to do more videos like that where I break it down. I use Florence Kelly and FDR's Pearl Harbor speech a lot in my videos because I know those super well. I'm probably going to have to find a new one, like a new speech to do, because people might get sick of me talking about Florence Kelly. Okay, so we are kind of at like the end. So please feel free to post any like final questions. I don't want to keep anybody too late. Have you ever had your students keep a binder? I used to, but then we moved to Google Classroom. And so honestly, everything kind of was in there. I used to have them keep like a writing portfolio. And my intention with that was that they would look at it before the test and kind of go over all their old essays and old feedback. I don't know that they actually did. But what we did this year was, since it was all on Google Classroom, there was one day where like I was absent, like I had a sub. And so I told them to kind of go back through Google Classroom and look at their most recent essays, looking at the feedback that they got from me, but also just kind of as a reminder of what their stronger essays were like. So I kind of have them have like a digital portfolio, not a literal one, but like Google Classroom. I do think they can, and I do have them hold on to all physical copies, like of their essays in their folder. It's one of those things where I think when I, as a teacher, tell them to look at them, they humor me, but I don't think they use it as much to their advantage as I want them to. So yeah, I definitely think you could have your students keep a binder, but I do like them to look at their old essays before they take the test. Oh, okay. It looks like Tyler posted that in the chat for us. So thank you. I thought it was super helpful, that link of just like all of those, because you could like for me, like I would be able to highlight, okay, I'm using this prompt with this class, because I use a couple prompts and not just in my AP classes and stuff like that. And all of them are linked. And he went back reasonably far. I don't use super old prompts, so I appreciate that you kind of stopped around 2003. There are some prompts from like the 90s. I just think they've redone the test multiple times since then, so I don't use those. But yes, props to Tyler for that. Yeah, I tend to spend 4 to 6 weeks on synthesis and argument, probably closer to 6 weeks. Mostly because we have to we go through at least one together, and it feels like it takes like a lot longer than it should, but I want to make sure they know all the skills. I love these meetings. Well, thank you, Tara. So speaking of meetings, the next one is the 31st. That one will also be focused on planning. So feel free to email me if you have any requests of like, hey, or suggestions like, hey, you could, if you did this, it would be more helpful or something like that. Cause I'm learning too. I'm learning how to do this. So I appreciate the grace that you guys have shown me. Also, if there was a question that you asked in the chat and I did not answer it, please feel free to reach out to me via email. Just coachhallwrites@gmail.com, or on Instagram or something, and I'd be happy to give you an answer. I might have missed a couple things in the chat. All right, so I hope everyone has a great evening, and I hope to see you back next month. And also, don't forget about that YouTube Live in July. I'll send out more information about that as it gets closer. Oh, so vocab. Short answer is we had some posters in a word wall this year that the students liked. and I was doing vocab and context, but I don't have like a miracle solution for vocab. But remind me next time, and I can talk about like the word wall and the posters, and show you all what I did with that. It's nothing super fancy though. What time for next time? So it's going to be the same time. So it should be, sorry, I'm looking over to the side because I have it written down on my computer screen over here. So it'd be July 31st, and it should be the same time. So it should be 7 p.m. Eastern. For me, since I'm on Central Time, it's 6 p.m. But yes, so I will send out email reminders, and you should get an email reminder from Lighthall the day of. But if you're on my email list, you'll get additional reminders. All right, awesome. And I'll just pop the email list link in the chat in case anyone needed that. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you, Gina. Well, I'm glad it was helpful, Toby. Thank you so much for continuing to come. Bye, Mel. Thank you so much.